Great. Wonderful. Welcome to all of you to this collaborative webinar where we'll spend the next couple of hours talking about the innovative ways in which 3 institutions, really 4, because one person can speak to 2 institutions, have really utilized digital storytelling as a tool for student success, for student retention, for community engagement, for a whole host of outcomes that they'll talk about in further detail. My name is Stephanie Schooley. I am Executive Director of an organization called Campus Compact of the Mountain West. We are a higher education nonprofit that serves about 22 colleges and universities in Colorado and Wyoming, looking at trying to increase and build community engagement initiatives, curricular and co-curricular, across the institution, both to meet and enhance student learning outcomes and engaged student activities, but also to help address real and challenging community needs. Our role in this is really to highlight and bring to the fore innovative and best practice programming that is happening in the Mountain West. And we have been lucky enough to partner with the Center for Digital Storytelling on this webinar for a national perspective on that work as well. And you'll hear from all of these individuals in just a moment. As we get going, before we get really into the weeds, some technical details about this system and how to interact with it. We've already talked about the use of the Q&A and chat buttons for purposes of making your voice heard, and please do so freely. After the webinar concludes, and we are recording this, we will post a link to the webinar so that you can view it at a later time, share it with faculty, staff, community partners, students, whomever on your campus. And along with that, we'll be sending an email out that will include all of the handouts, so you'll have access to all of this information. Along with a link for an evaluation, we encourage you to please take the evaluation, give us your feedback that way so that we can continue to improve upon these as we move forward. I think that's it. If you have any technical assistance needed or you want to follow up, my contact information is on here. And again, you'll get this via email after we finish. For today, we've done a welcome, and an overview of the system. We're going to move forward because really the content you're wanting to hear is from the people that are lined up at Brady Bunch style to me underneath me, but that's no reflection of anything except the way that it's lined up. Looking at a national context and some resources for digital storytelling with Daniel Weinshenker, who's with the Center for Digital Storytelling. And then that should say 3 case studies from the field, and we'll hear from 3 different models of how digital storytelling has been implemented and integrated into campus programming. And then again, a significant chunk of time to respond to questions that you have that may be specific to your institution, to a program that you work with, etc. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Daniel to introduce himself and get us started on this wild adventure. Daniel, it's all you.
Hey folks, happy Friday to you. This is the last thing you're gonna do before what? Beer 30, no matter what time zone you're in, hopefully. We're here under what, 1.5 feet of snow, something like that. Mm-hmm. And as far as webinars go, school is open. So I think I'm a little curious. I don't know, you didn't tell people, let's see, how to, I wonder if people have their chat windows up. If you don't, sometimes I like to ask some questions just so I get a sense as to who I'm talking to. I think at the bottom of your screen, you might see a little button that says chat, mm-hmm. I'm guessing. Click on it, and then I'll say hello. Oh, Truman did send a little comment out to everyone. You can write hello back. That way I know you're an engaged audience. But it's also because, for example, oh, Truman wrote hello back. Thanks. I'd kind of like to hear, like, from those of you who are here, how many people have heard of digital storytelling before? Or if they have.
And Daniel, you may want to look at the Q&A button because that seems to be where folks are posting a lot of comments.
Oh, I see.
Mm-hmm.
At the Q&A button. Hey, Terry, and Dana, and Bess. No chat button, but yes, heard of digital storytelling. Cool, that's good enough. So some people have heard of it, and I would say that, you know, it's a strange term in that I'm sure that people outside of the realm of what our organization has been doing for 20 years have used it in many, many, many different ways. Everything from saying that if you write a story in Microsoft Word, it's a digital story, to talking with someone over the phone can be a digital story, depending on if you're telling a story or not. Let's see, I'm just looking at some of the answers here. All right, good. So I think what I wanted to talk about specifically, and what I think will be useful here, is talking about our model of digital storytelling that was invented, or that we came up with around 1993. So let me just tell a little bit about the history. The Center for Digital Storytelling, which is kind of credited as being the founding organization of this movement and this genre of media, started in 1993. Before that, we were a small theater in San Francisco called Life on the Water. Our executive director, named Joe Lambert, was the son of labor and union organizers in Texas. His parents met at a pecan sheller strike, or so it goes. But this is important to understand why this is not simply just a technology push, and not just a technology literacy push even, but a push that actually has its roots in social justice movements. So one thing to think about here, there's no particular slide for this. I think I'm just going off the agenda, Steph. Mm-hmm. I'll give a little bit of history. I'll show a story that was made at one school, and then I'll talk about how it's been implemented. At least it's in some places, but just in not very much detail, so that then you can hear from Marty and Truman and Lisa and Brian as to how they're implementing it on a much deeper level. So in 1993, the theater was changed from a theater into the Center for Digital Storytelling. That was primarily because one super important thing happened in 1993, and that was that the first video editing software became available on a personal computer. And Joe Lambert, our founder, and other folks at the theater were really excited about this, and could already kind of see the future that a personal computer and the ability basically to edit screen media, which was previously, of course, something that most people that were not either rich or were professional media producers had access to. This was going to be something that everyone was going to have access to. And so not only was it important then that people finally be able to speak in a language in which they're being spoken to, which I know isn't a correct English sentence because I ended in a preposition, but I'm going to move forward past that. It's a democratic issue if you can't speak in the language in which you're being spoken to. So this draws back on some of the social justice aspects of the theater, of letting people who don't typically have a voice be able to get up on stage and have a voice and a platform for their voice, really not a voice, but a platform or a way to broadcast their voice. And so that's really kind of how we started, and we were born out of that technology movement combined with the social justice movement of the time. And for the past 22 years, we just had our 20th year anniversary recently. For the past 22 years, we've basically been teaching the exact same thing. And what's interesting is that just recently in the past, I would say in the past, certainly 10 years, and then even more so in the past 5, has digital storytelling really caught fire in higher ed. And it's wonderful that that's happened. It's a little sad that that's happened. I was presenting at University of Colorado Boulder yesterday, and they were talking about how the education system is sometimes one of the last places that that new methods can break into for various reasons. And I welcome you all, because I'm guessing that you're from that world, can ruminate and theorize as to why that is. But it's interesting because as these tools for literacy have been out for so long, very few people know how to use them still, 22 years later. So if you go and ask people if they're able to author in screen media in school, most of them say no. and Marty will probably talk to this, if you're able to, even as a professor, to show your scholarship in screen media, in multimodal narrative, that's oftentimes a no as well. So maybe that's why recently there's been a big push. I think it's from the students who are actually wondering why they're not able to author multimodally as part of their scholarship. So let's go forward in the agenda here. I thought before I say anything more about the movement and what started, I think it would be good to watch a story. So we do a lot of work, as you'll see, at many different universities, and not just us, but our methods are taken and implemented without us at many universities. We're happy that that's going on. One of the schools that we've done some work with, though I wasn't facilitating, we didn't facilitate the workshop in which this story was created, but we are used a lot in terms of service learning and study abroad. So this piece is actually from a service learning and study abroad class at Beloit College, where we have done some work, and this was after work we had done there was completed. So take a look at this one piece from a student after a study abroad and service trip she had done in Jordan.
It had been 9 weeks since I arrived in Jordan. 63 days before I knew what had happened to me. I'm white.
Maybe volume up.
I don't look like you.
Volume up.
I don't act like you.
You're gonna have to do it on your computer, I
I
think.
don't pray like you. I don't share your culture. And I definitely don't understand your struggles. I guess I don't really know you. But I think I'm in love with you. How does that make you feel? I don't exactly know how it happened. I mean, I always hoped it would. But there was a time when I wasn't sure. Loneliness. That's all I felt the first month I spent with you. You don't speak my language. You don't understand my provocative behavior, or rather, you wouldn't understand if you knew. You can't tell me you would. Maybe it was the food. The food was always amazing. No, it wasn't just the food. It was something else. Something deeper made me fall in love with you. You changed me. It had been 9 weeks since I arrived in Jordan. 63 days before I understood the transformation, the personalization, the identity. It was a Tuesday. We were riding in a taxi just as we had done 126 times since our arrival. Day in and day out, we rode those taxis, observed our surroundings, and interacted with the drivers. We soaked in the culture. We neared the market when a visiting friend of mine made an innocent comment. "Israel is so beautiful," she exclaimed. "There are so many flowers everywhere." And then she looked around, and what she saw was the aesthetic inferiority of Jordan. I found myself personally offended. "Yeah," I retorted, "'cause they steal all our water." She had taken their side. And then I thought to myself, she doesn't understand the struggle. You know? Perhaps that was when I knew I was in love with you. On the 63rd day, I understood the transformation, the personalization, the identity, my identity. I'm in love with you. How does that make you feel?
All right. Well, thanks for taking a look at that one. It seems like a lot of you know, or seemingly when I was looking at some of the Q&A answers, that a lot of you know or either even have implemented your own versions of some digital storytelling. I'm not sure how much of this I need to go over. It might be more helpful for you to hear from other people. I can say that, you know, what leads our approach and maybe what separates it from other ways that people use the term digital storytelling, is that all of the work that we usually promote is all first person work. So what and that also comes from that social justice push, that this is an opportunity for people to be able to finally speak their own story and have it, instead of having it, that story being co-opted by another producer, as what is typically done in the newspaper, on the local and national news scene. You know, just like being able to blog, it's your ability to tell your own story the way you want to tell it. And while a lot of our work is within higher ed, certainly a lot of it also is within community organizations. And we work a lot with people, again, whose voices have been mostly marginalized in terms of mainstream media. So it's super important that these people themselves, if you are also a university doing university and community collaborations, or having your students go out and work with people in the community, as maybe you'll hear some of these folks talk about, it's super important that people get a chance to have control over their story. And that's primarily, in one way, why we teach technology within this social justice format, is so that people, it's not as important to us that everybody knows how to use a computer. We're not necessarily a technology training organization. However, in some ways, that also adds to the social justice kind of impact on a community when people can own their stories. You know, we do a lot of work with survivors of trauma, and oftentimes this is the very first time that someone feels like they have control over that type of situation. They didn't have a control over what happened, but they do have control in this process over what they want to say about what happened. And so what they want to say isn't just what they want to write down on a sheet of paper and then record into a microphone. It's really about doing the editing from soup to nuts, from the very beginning to the very end of the process. So I will kind of call that out as saying that's really an important part of doing the community work, but it's also what gets people to a level of literacy with the actual technical tool set that seems to have a lot of impact. Another reason why we do a lot of first person work is that we find that people just learn quicker that way. It's the same kind of argument that you might use when saying that you're going to learn a language, when better if you're plopped down into the middle of that country and you need to find a bathroom. You're going to learn how to say, where is the bathroom, quicker than you ever would if you weren't in that country and not in that situation. And so we find that we can teach a software even as heavy as Final Cut, for example, in the matter of 3 days. That might take, some classes at a college or university 6 months to teach. And really, we're relying on the notion that, again, people are going to learn really quick when they need to make it. And they need to make it when it's not a marketing piece. They need to make it when it's a personal story, when kind of part of their identity rests on this. And it also brings a lot up to the front when you're thinking about doing this in terms of work in the university and classes, that in many classes, students don't see each other's work. And I'm sure Marty will probably talk to this, and maybe Truman as well. But when you're going to show personal work to other people in your class, it definitely raises the bar for how much effort people are going to be putting into these types of projects, and the risks associated with that as well. There are definitely ethical risks that go along with this that hopefully people will speak to. So I've talked a little bit, and you can see on this slide, of the value of this kind of awareness, of self-awareness, as maybe one of the things that we can teach most and that students can learn most at a university, is who they are in the world, what they think, what choices they have, and then also learning like the tool sets to become a producer instead of just a consumer of screen media. I think I'll skip to the next slide here. Definitely there are schools that also use this and programs that use this, especially like the study abroad programs, but other programs as well, that actually use the stories if the students allow them to promote the programs that they're currently running. And even schools about the impact that a certain school, Oberlin does this, where they'll publish digital stories made by Oberlinites or Oberlinians. What is it? Does anyone know? I'm looking at the Q&A. Oberlinians? I don't know. But they do promote, different schools absolutely use these stories to help promote their programs. International students coming, and again, alumni stories as well as to where they took their education. So it's really used in a bunch of different places. I'll talk a little bit more probably at the end in terms of how to collaborate with CDS. The people on the call here have all done their own work at their institutions, and they also have worked with CDS on a number of occasions. But we try and give people the tool set to do it themselves, and oftentimes their staff will go through our facilitation trainings, or we'll bring facilitation trainings to a university. We do make people go through the regular workshop first, where they all tell a personal story as well. So think about the impact of doing that within your department or interdepartmentally, to get to know people on your campus. We certainly are hired as well, sometimes just to come in and do team building work with departments at universities, so that you know who you're working with, and then you form bonds with them that otherwise you may not have done. So I think I'm going to turn it over here so that other people can tell about how they've implemented digital storytelling at their universities and colleges.
Great, thanks, Daniel.
I'll look forward to questions at the Q&A afterwards.
Awesome. And we've, just as a reminder to folks that are participating, if these slides are going through and you don't worry about taking notes, because we'll email this information to you so that you'll be able to follow up to access some of these stories again for review. So all is well, and all of these resources that Daniel's indicated in here and examples will be included in that. So thank you, Daniel. We're going to move to one of the campus models that we're highlighting here from the Community College of Denver. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, Jocelyn, and Brian Dixon from CCD, and you guys can introduce yourself and then move forward with your program design.
Thanks, Stephanie and Daniel. Can everybody hear me okay, just to make sure?
Loud and clear.
Okay. So yeah, Brian Dixon, Chair of College Composition and Reading here.
I'm Lisa Jocelyn. I coordinate the Student Success Center and formerly was the coordinator for digital storytelling.
Thanks, Stephanie. You can move on to the next slide. So we began connecting with the Center for Digital Storytelling back in May of 2012, I believe, and we were really thinking about how to engage students in a different way in 21st century digital skills. Brandon Protas, who's listening on this, came up with this idea of connecting with CDS, and we were just like, let's go for this. And because we got early adopting faculty that were willing to do this, and plenty of students that would be engaged as well. So back in July of 2012, we went through one workshop, a 5-day intensive, and also a Train the Trainer workshop in August of 2012. And in July of 2012, 5 days, 10 faculty, we engaged with this listen deeply idea, collaboration that Daniel mentioned as well, and also this group versus individual process. And our VPI, who attended the video watching ceremony at the end, was really impressed of how we all bonded, and we all ended up getting to know each other so much better, which of course that familiarity breeds success within an institutions, which could be siloed so much all the time. Lisa, do you have anything else to speak to that?
No.
No? Okay.
Brian, just one piece real quick. If you don't mind, if you guys could turn your mic up just a tiny bit. I think a couple people were having problems hearing you
Okay.
guys. You may have to do the old school bluegrass, come together really close around the microphone and switch in and out. Think of Del McCurry and
This is fireside chat, so to speak.
exactly. It'll be a little bit more intimate that way. And sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just want to make sure everyone could hear you loud and clear.
No, understood. So just one more thing back on the previous slide. Thank you. Don't mind. We went through a lot of this deliberate process of making sure we had a clear rationale for doing this and identifying where that money is, and you can ask those questions where we got the money later, and what else we needed during that particular summer of 2012, and then that's where also we developed an implementation guideline for the next year. So again, yeah, you can ask questions at the end for that. And the next slide, yeah.
So this is an example of a student digital story. We had students present their digital stories at an annual film festival, and these were voted on by faculty, and this is our winner from last year.
When I first became a student at CCD, I felt like a newborn, so curious, ready to fill my brain with knowledge, but so uncertain of this new world around me. To a point I felt lost and insecure. When I started classes, I was fed with knowledge. Since the beginning, I was nurtured to grow feathers towards my dream. And I can say this class, AAA 109, has opened lots of doors, making a better person out of me. It gave me all of the tools and provided me the keys to success. I learned to know myself and discover the great person I am and how to use that to become successful. The Strengths class made a huge impact in my life. I am more confident about my thoughts. I can think outside of the box. This made me see a new horizon. I am a creator by choice and commitment. And with this, I have earned a personal responsibility to always give the best of me, and the strong activity made me realize I have to start strong and be consistent. Thanks to a culture wheel, I am proud of the person I am now. More importantly, I know what to do to become the person I want to be. The passports helped me a lot as a student and as a person. I've been receiving help from books, food, tutoring, and housing. I've definitely been out of my comfort zone, but I'm happy to take challenges now. And not to forget time management. Thanks to a little organization, I have a little time to relax. With this, I can say I have beautiful and colorful wings that represents me and my strengths. I am ready to fly towards my goal, my sweet dream to become a veterinarian and be part of a bird sanctuary.
So that was an end of semester assignment for AAA, which is Advanced Academic Achievement. So it's a first semester class. And this particular one was made entirely on an iPad. So if people are thinking about logistical questions, the iPad is pretty functional for making these digital stories.
And I'll jump in on this one too, before we start talking about the data, is that one of the important things that we've encountered with the continual implementation of this in classes is that the students are transformed themselves, as Daniel alluded to a little bit, with this inner transformation. They recognize what's happening to themselves, either by going through this journey in a particular class or in college overall. We've had some students do digital stories with the Transfer Success Center to tell that journey of going to a four-year school. And that's been interesting to see, because some of the students are like, why am I at a community college? I should be at a four-year college. And then to see this transformation to say like, hey, you know, going to community college is not a bad thing at all these days. Yeah, We can go to the next slide.
So as part of the way that I was funded was through the Haku and Walmart fund, and so I put together some resources at the end to say what our findings were, and I worked with the IR department to collect this longitudinal data, and it is statistically significant that 67% of students who used digital storytelling in paired classes over their peers in the same classes who did not use digital storytelling but were in the same section, that they had 4% higher success rate, which means that they successfully completed the class. You can also see some retention data on the bottom, and that is longer term. So we'll just leave it at that. And questions?
To speak to the one more thing on the data is that as a college, we're still exploring under a strategic plan is what is overall working at the college pedagogically. And if one of our institutional outcomes is ethical and effective user of technology, then how does digital storytelling fit under this? And how do we get complete buy-in from the college? And I think we do for the most part, which Stephanie, this kind of leads to the next slide. Oh, my apologies. Let's go to the next slide and then maybe we can get back to student surveys maybe.
Sure,
Yeah.
and actually, could I ask you a quick question, Brian and Lisa, since thinking about that student data, and this can come up again during Q&A if folks are interested, but could you talk a little bit about the demographics of the students that data represents?
Yeah. No, good question. We're still getting to that next phase of data collection. I will say that one of the things that's come up continually at each of the film festivals, and we've had, I believe, 4 now, and one of the things that comes up continually is that students from either our minority background or our Anglo background, which our college seems to be pretty split between the two, over and over again, we know there's a comment that I wish I could do this more throughout my classes because I've spent more time on this project than anything else I've done, more than writing a paper. And we're hoping that our next layer could be to engage more in the service learning area and going beyond the first person narratives with just in themselves, although that's been a huge benefit for students. We see that too.
Also, there is sort of an assumption among faculty that younger students are going to do better on this than older students because of their technical, they were born into this sort of age. But what I have found in doing some of these trainings is that while the younger students may be more natural at using technology than some of the older students, they may still struggle with building the script, building the content. And so what happens in the class is that there's community building because different students have different strengths and they can play off of that and support one another to get the project finished.
And maybe that goes to the next slide after the data, Stephanie, which echoes Daniel's comment about students sharing with each other. And this is a huge thing when we know as a college at CCD, when they can make friends and friends going along that journey to finish school is a huge thing. These stories tend to bond students really quickly if they're not bonded already in the classroom.
And one other question that just came up, and I'm sorry to interrupt because it messes you with your flow, I understand, but I think that the question around data is one that people are very interested in, and some folks were wondering if you all articulated what does student success mean. So going back to this slide and this piece, how did you define student success?
So that's an HR term, and it means that the student passed the class.
Okay.
Yeah, C or better for IR purposes. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'll move it forward now.
Yeah, we can move to the campus-wide visibility. So Lisa, you maybe want to talk this one.
Sure. So Community College of Denver is situated on a campus that is shared with 2 other institutions, and we're unique that way. And so one way to get visibility for digital storytelling was to put it onto this channel, which is a closed circuit channel and plays on the Auraria campus. So not only our students and passerbys can see it, but also the students and faculty at 2 other four-year schools. So Film Fest, we talked about. Auraria library features. So since we are a tri-institution campus, we do have a very fancy library, and one of their new features and a redesign that they have just done is to have this huge screen, and they asked for content, and we were actually one of the leaders in having that content where it's sort of digital literacy.
Yeah, so you can see, I mean, there's plenty of buy-in, but I think we feel like there's maybe one more missing piece, and perhaps that's going to be identified through our strategic planning process. Do we have, I don't think there's anything else on this slide, Stephanie, so if you want to. Yeah.
So I mentioned earlier that I was the coordinator for digital storytelling at our campus. The funding ended mid-December, and so did the position. And so the challenge now is what does that mean for CCD's future implementation of digital storytelling, and how does that affect the use campus-wide?
So the huge thing is, and I know Marty will be speaking next, or Truman, I'm not sure, but Marty could cover this also with the content area, is, you know, developing this culture of being able to take risks in the classroom. And there's always the continual debate, well, I gotta cover content, gotta cover competencies. Well, how do we get out a learning outcome in a different way? And so still developing that culture. I think that's it for us. Thank you, Stephanie.
Great, thanks so much. And we'll pull you guys back into the conversation as we get to questions and answers and some more specificity of what folks are looking for from some of these campus models. All right, moving forward, we're going to be talking with Marty from the University of Colorado, Denver, who is, as Brian and Lisa were mentioning, also part of this tri-institutional Auraria campus, which is right in the downtown Denver area. And Marty, if you could just introduce yourself, and then we will get rolling.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to move up because I am thinking of how special you are. I actually got a haircut for this session today to make sure I look nice and clean, so I want to get close. Good to see you. This is pretty exciting because I'm learning a ton already from the previous presenters. So I appreciate the work you guys are doing. And I kind of approached the webinar as a way to demonstrate to you folks that we all are resources for you, and we should keep the conversation alive. It doesn't have to end after this, the webinar. And even if you don't ask questions, I still probably wouldn't be on track. So feel free to ask questions anytime, and I'll try to answer them as if anything comes up. You know, if you want to have one message to remember about my presentation, and many of you probably are far ahead, maybe even further than me with this technology, is if you do it in a classroom, the day before you start your class, just remove half of the readings. You know, if you take out the readings, you'll free up space for the production. And the principle or the philosophy is, and many of you probably agree, is that there's no longer, or there shouldn't be no longer, this inequality between the written word and the visual text. So by removing the readings, half of the readings, you are honoring this process of producing stories and allowing people to share parts of themselves and be vulnerable in the classroom. So I'm going to zip through a couple of these slides. And again, I'm a resource as well as these other folks. My contribution might be a bit different. I'm going to look at this digital storytelling process as something that it tacks in between the classroom, in between the university and communities. And then my general approach is to look at the process of digital storytelling as a research process. And when I say research, that's not evaluation, but research to promote knowledge or increase understanding about a particular theory or set of theories. And part of that means looking at digital storytelling as a process that is approved by human subjects committees that are there to approve research, which is designed to produce generalizable knowledge. So what you're seeing here is a flyer for a project. And I wanted to throw this out here for people to see that these digital stories and the process behind it, it's a money magnet. If it's done properly and you do it with integrity, it's a great way to attract money. And I'm talking specifically about research money.
Okay, because my personal paycheck hasn't gone up.
and so some of the things I'm saying are to be provocative, but I think through collaboration, this project I'm presenting here is a very complex project that involves multiple professors, a high school of pregnant and parenting teenagers, the Ford Foundation, a research center, and it's a very complex project, but it involved 3 workshops. With digital storytelling as the focus and understanding narratives about young women, pregnant and parenting teenagers, and stereotypes about being Latina, stereotypes about being pregnant, and how to use this to promote counter stereotypes. So I will, as I go through this, talk about how you can see some of these or stay in touch because I'm still processing some of the data. Let's move to the next slide. So some of you, again, probably have this process dialed in pretty well. So I look at digital storytelling as a research method and a process. As Daniel said, these are first-person videos. What I do is a bit skewed in the sense that I already came into this with a professional filmmaking background. And so when I work with students and when I work with people in the community doing projects based on research, agenda, research purposes, I really want these things to look good. And I probably spend too much time with people doing some post-production work to ensure that they look good and moving beyond the audio narrated PowerPoint presentation. So I think the 2 samples we saw already were great. There was video clips in the first one, and the second one had nice music that came in with a couple photos, and the woman's voice was very compelling. So all these things are actors in a piece that are very valuable. This process is a natural extension of some other kinds of research strategies that are listed there that some of you may know about, or you can build bridges between this process and these others and create hybrid digital stories if that's your thing. So if you can move on. Thank you. So in terms of scholarship, my sort of approach to looking at digital storytelling as a research process, not necessarily a tool in the classroom, because I haven't yet used the research approach in the classroom like the previous presenters. But this is to, at least in my world, to look at the digital stories and the process to increase or rethink wellness in general health. That could be health equities, health disparities, or other issues. And then also think how to scale up a story so it can actually influence the landscape on which policy is changed or policy is made. And there's ways to do that by having screenings with decision makers, through Twitter chats or with the staff of legislators. One of the other things is also increase youth leadership. I think most of us who are a little bit older, we are ready to retire soon. So we want to build a young cadre of folks who can carry the mantle. And so I really appreciate what Lisa said, because young people, you think they're dialed in the technology, but a lot of them don't have a lot of stories, or they're not comfortable sharing the stories like the older folks. You can go on to the next slide. Yeah, I'm ready for the next slide, because in terms of me being a resource and looking at your work with a digital storyteller or a group of digital storytellers, you can, with a lot of time and anxiety, publish these things in a way to increase the scholarship, but also push the digital storytelling process so it's not just a production of visual imagery, but also production of scholarly material. And that doesn't just have to be a chapter or a manuscript. It could also be a compilation DVD. So these, if you want any of these, let me know. I'm happy to send PDFs for the chapter or publication that I'm talking about or put on the screen. The last one I want to point to is just came out. Sorry, if you can go back. The last one is interesting because what I'm trying to do is, like everyone, carve my own niche in this area and try to draw more attention to how the process of digital storytelling and the pieces themselves, there's some therapeutic properties there, and that therapeutic property area I think is under-researched. And so I got this new chapter coming out that is written with me and a storyteller, and we analyze her video that deals with schizophrenia. It's on Vimeo. If you type in Betsy Bug and my last name, you'll find it. If you can't find it, I'm happy to share it with you. But I want to push people to look at some of the mental health issues and or the therapeutic possibilities that could come through digital storytelling as a research as well as a classroom activity. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's my approach, just building and maybe being redundant with some of the other speakers. The studio or the workshop or the seminar or the classroom, I look at that as the space where this, magic happens, which is pretty exciting. And so the philosophy is, again, this creative space. Let's get rid of some of the readings. Let's have a robust discussion about the different steps to follow, but really providing people with space to get stories told, and do it in a way that builds some kind of cohesion among the group. Or you just recognize that some people have points of tension because in courses I teach, which are mostly cultural anthropology, sometimes these courses tend to just reinforce people's perceptions of culture instead of trying to create new understandings. So sometimes the digital stories reflect that. And then being respectful of people's positions is always a challenge. The last point on this particular slide, digital storytelling makes you grow old very fast, only because it is so time consuming. And in the classroom, there's not a lot of time. And I really enjoy what Lisa said and others about sharing. I think Daniel mentioned this, sharing these publicly. It does things in the classroom because typically people write papers or take tests, and there's not that camaraderie, which is essential to build community and to just build this feeling of being human, and getting the chills up and down your spine and on your skin when you watch these pieces and people come alive. So if you can go to the next slide.
Hey, Marty, can I say one thing? Can I just add in one little thing?
Yeah.
I think probably like the number one feedback or pushback that we usually get from educators, like across the board, whether it's K-12 or higher ed, on, oh, I'd like to do this, but oh, there's no way I could do this because, my students know so much more technology than I do. And one of the things that we typically tell them is, it's not your job in this format. It doesn't need to be your job to teach them the technology. I mean, one thing that we've done at Community College of Denver, and Lisa and Brian can speak to this, is they actually hired us to do trainings for their lab techs. So that's something that, the students could go into the lab, and some of the lab helpers and assistants there not only knew how to use the software, but knew the types of project that these students were working on, so they could be sensitive to helping them work on first-person pieces. But in addition to that, and the point I was really trying to make was just that it's not, the technology is something that comes really easily to most of the students out there. If they can't figure it out, one of their fellow students will figure it out and teach them. And that is another way to really build camaraderie. I've done this in a bunch of different classrooms, and I say, oh, how many people here want to use iMovie? And one person will know iMovie, a couple others won't, but they'll go off together and teach each other iMovie in an hour. And another set of students will go off and use Windows Movie Maker. And another set of students will use Final Cut or Premiere. And so that, using the technology as a barrier for why you shouldn't do this work. I think if you're okay as an educator, and this is a hard thing, but if you're okay, and hopefully you are, as an educator, not being the holder of all knowledge and not having your ego tied up in, I'm the one who has to know everything, then it really opens up a chance for students to collaborate. And again, like Marty said, to build that kind of camaraderie and actually teach each other the things that you can't teach them. Because what you're really responsible for is getting them to be aware. And
so
to give
Daniel,
them the assignment.
Great comments. I really appreciate you interjecting that, because that's really important. And I'm happy to, I can speed up my time, or you can give me Stephanie, how many minutes I have left, because it's not difficult for me to be pretty flexible. Building off of what Daniel said, when I do this in the classroom, I generally tell people that about 90% of the labor is creating the narrative. And I tell people to be prepared that when they write their first draft, it's probably going to be stellar or maybe not, and it might need a lot of work. So I sometimes go back and forth with students through email or in person, and we may record after the 10th version or the 10th, going back and forth, adjusting, modifying, strengthening the script. And I prefer that I record them with my professional equipment to make sure the audio is very crisp. But I'm shifting away from that because my classes are getting bigger and bigger, and it's just so time consuming. So the key point about this slide, to go to the very bottom of this slide, I really think looking at how digital storytelling could be disseminated using these social media tools, and also using advocacy. It's this area that maybe is underutilized in the universe of digital storytelling. So there is advocacy, I think, connected to digital storytelling. That could be some change at your own institution. It could be change in the community. It could be dealing with federal issues. I work with the World Health Organization on some tobacco-related things, and the visual imagery and narrations of the people I work with in Central Africa on a different project are really powerful. So I think I want to just make a plug. Don't just look at the exercise ending in the class. Try to see if there's, from the concept level, an advocacy angle or a social media angle to keep these things going. Next slide, please.
Oh, Marty, this is Brian. Sorry, do you mind if I interject one
Yeah,
thing?
no problem.
Back to the other slide, Stephanie. Thank you. So yeah, Marty definitely was emphasizing where CCD wants to go next with the advocacy and social media piece, but the creative work and imagery piece, we emphasize all the time to students to find the image that they already have at home or create it themselves. And I always think about Daniel Pink's book, A Whole New Brain, I believe is the title. But developing that creative way of looking at things, I think, is extremely important for problem solving, developing, again, just different perspectives of how you solve things is really crucial as well.
Great, thanks. And Brian, to build off of that, let's keep it on this slide for 1 second. I have a policy of not allowing my students to rip things off the internet.
Yes.
I encourage either drawing a picture or taking a picture or bringing personal photographs. I actually have a publication I'm working on with the art therapists in this high school I mentioned, and we have integrated art therapy in digital storytelling to talk about personal transformation and stuff. So that is an essential part of the individual and group transformation that goes on when you do the digital storytelling, the image process, and talking through how an image, not just a literal image, but maybe something more metaphorical or playful, can tell a story than just a picture of something that's so obvious. So thanks, Brian, for bringing that up. And Stephanie, if you want, you can hold your hands up how many seconds or minutes I have left. Oh, okay, good. Awesome. 61. Okay, so you can go to the next slide. Okay, so this, again, this is not new to people. This is just, for some people who are new to this is what a script looks like in the top section of this slide. And I didn't choose to integrate any video in my presentation because I just, I didn't plan very well, but I have a ton out there you should go to, and I have the website at the end of my presentation. But in terms of analysis, so elevating the process from just production and a class assignment to research, this is the script. The script is actually data. So you can analyze the script. You can analyze what people say. You can analyze people what they don't say. You can analyze the process of writing the script. You can analyze just the issue of people hearing the sound of their own voice is an interesting entry point for analysis, because we all tell these stories, but when you do it in a public way, sometimes it could be traumatic or sometimes it could be liberating. And then down here, just a little bit of a bio. This story about a high school teen mom. She's a leader among her peers, and in the story itself, there's a couple issues about stereotypes that she talks about. The issue of self-determination comes out, and then in the actual story itself, the visual imagery, she uses a roller coaster as a vehicle to tell her story. And then she also has a flower that represents transformation. So these are just different moving parts, component parts that are actors, but also entry points for analysis. Next slide, please. And then with this slide, the purpose is to demonstrate to you, I look at the work I do in a collaborative way. And so the art therapist teacher in a high school I work with, I wanted to collaborate with her and get a publication out of our digital storytelling workshop with teen moms. And I wanted to build on her knowledge of the story of like understanding the story through the hero's journey by Joseph Campbell. And so she put this slide together, and I use it with her, and we use it in presentations to just sort of talk about the process of going from the start and the end, and how these stories in a way are very formulaic, but also can be interesting analytically to talk about each step in the process. But this slide is to demonstrate collaboration and then publication of our work through the written and the visual text. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, now this slide is for two reasons. When a scholar, not me, a different scholar named Alin Gubrium at the UMass Amherst, she's an incredible resource, a colleague, a mentor. If you haven't heard of her work, look up Alin Gubrium in the anthropology department. This is a picture of a manuscript page, and I brought it up because there is some tension when you do this kind of research. When you do it for research purposes, you have to follow certain guidelines. And so in her project, she was told that she has to pixelate people's faces. This picture doesn't necessarily do justice to the issue, but in her work in this publication, faces are pixelated. But people sign forms to say that they want their image to go public because they value that they are seen, even though it's a research project. So the point I'm trying to make, and there's tension between what you can do by getting things published and how there's contradiction between some of the forms and requirements of the Human Subjects Committee. And those things are constantly being worked out. There's a lot of ethical issues associated with digital storytelling, and I think it's constantly changing those issues, and those issues that deal with imagery, people oversharing, or people being re-traumatized are just a few of the things that are challenges for us as facilitators. Next slide. Okay, so to telescope forward with some of the work that I do with folks in the community, and this could also be for folks in the classroom, is how do you then move out of these environments into public arenas where they can share their stories and influence thinking or provide counter stereotypes. So this is just a photograph of two storytellers that were in one of my projects at Florence Crittenton High School here in Denver, focusing on reproductive and sexual health care access and justice. And they shared their stories at a fundraiser. And so this is about youth leadership. It's about presentation, but it's also then rethinking a digital story as a potential fundraising tool that could be used for a community group or some other issue. So the fundraising aspect comes out of the process. It doesn't necessarily go into the conceptualization of the story itself. Because if you say, let's design a fundraising video by using digital storytelling, in a way, it's not being true or honoring the actual process itself as laid out, for example, by the Center for Digital Storytelling, which provides the scaffolding and the architecture of all the work that I do. So next slide, please. And then in terms of policymakers, this photograph is a bunch of storytellers, but also high school students from the high school where I did research. This photograph is unrelated to my project, but there are storytellers here, and they went to talk to legislators at the Capitol here in Denver. The young women didn't get to show their videos, but I followed them in this advocacy day just to try to understand the opportunities they have potentially in the future to screen their work or to build relationships with storytellers and decision makers as a way to cultivate relationships so people's voices are heard where normally they aren't heard. And so these kinds of things are very exciting and happen around the country to develop leadership, but I think integrating digital storytelling is an opportunity for these kinds of advocacy days. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide I threw together for a couple different reasons. Just to throw out there, I want to educate myself on some of the things you guys are doing to address ethical issues. So here's a couple things that I thought would be important to share. As I mentioned, digital storytelling and participatory research, there's sort of a fluid way of doing things, and we're flexible, but also we have to address some of these ethical issues head on. One of the things that raises ethical issues is when you collect data, whether it's in the classroom or the community, but you also have goals to communicate that information outside the university or in a venue that's public. There's opportunities there, but there's also issues about representation and imagery and everything else. So I just want to throw that there's a point. And then who controls this information? When you're in a classroom, you could treat it like a paper and keep it private, but I think thinking through the stories as data as well as the imagery as data and who controls it, especially if there's information that personally identifies people, that raises issues along ethical lines, especially research lines. I'm all about you people looking at yourself as resources to educate members of human subjects boards. People who are in these boards to give the stamp of approval to digital storytelling research projects need to be made aware about certain issues, so you should feel empowered to educate them with the work you're doing. Don't look at IRB boards as an obstacle to your work, especially if it's innovative, because IRB boards are not designed to do that, but I think there's a lot of misperceptions and some lack of understanding about IRBs and their role in this process. And you can move on to the next slide.
Can I ask you a quick question, Marty, and for whoever else is working with students on this? What kind of conversations do you have with students themselves about these issues around kind of the ethics behind digital storytelling? Who owns information? How is it shared? And what's the value of those? What has the value of those conversations been?
I think the conversations primarily are about ownership and my ability as an instructor to screen them. And so I have more recently, I'm very systematic of making sure that students can choose not to make their story go public. So in the syllabus, I say that the stories will be put on my website, my private website, not the universities, because the universities to me are a little bit slow with some of this stuff. So the student can he can choose or she can choose not to have it go public. So that discussion, we talk about it, and sometimes students are a little reluctant, but sometimes they're fine with it because they want to share it. The other ethical issues is you find about artwork. Some people prefer to go and find things on the internet, as I kind of mentioned before, but I find when we talk about other people's artwork, there's usually students in the class who are artists, and they agree that you shouldn't co-opt or appropriate other people's artwork. And so the issue of using other people's imagery, even if it's copyright free, and I even don't do that, I don't use those much because I prefer people to make their own artwork if they can. Then the last issue is recently I'm finding people are taking advantage of this platform and maybe oversharing, and I'm concerned that maybe people might overshare, using heroin or doing, pot or whatever in an illegal way, and they want to put that in a story. And so I talk with students about being careful about that, but also honoring that they maybe are at a point in their life where they want to share this stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so now this is just the last slide on my part, and it's a website that just went up a couple weeks ago. It's not necessarily populated, but it's one of several websites where you can see some of the results of my project. And I'm putting this out there so you can check it out, later in a week or so when it's populated. But also I'm really interested in some of your work, your digital stories or project websites, because those things for me are tools and resources I can share with others. And I'd love to learn the approach that you take. So at any time, I'm happy to communicate with you after this is done, and of course answer any questions that may come up. Thank you for your time.
Great, thanks, Marty. And we're gonna go real quick to a website. Here, is that the one, Daniel?
Yeah, that's just one place where we've started compiling, at least for us as an organization. I realize that we have different, certainly different responsibilities and legal issues, for example, IRB and things like that, that you guys have to deal with at universities and colleges that we don't. But this is a good place to begin thinking about some of the different ethical practices or ethical considerations when doing this type of work. On this page, I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's storycenter.org/ethical-practice. If you scroll down the page, you'll get to a place where you'll actually see a storyteller's bill of rights. And so all the work that we do, and we actually won't work with the university or with any organization or with any community that won't ensure that the ownership of the piece that is made stays with the storyteller themselves. We absolutely refuse to do that. It's vital to the work that we do that people that tell stories have the ability to revoke them from collections, to take them off of the web. As you'll see, even on our own website and on our YouTube channel, we've helped people probably create over the past 22 years, somewhere around 25,000 stories. There's only a couple hundred up on our YouTube channel. We never considered ourselves to be the publisher of digital stories that people, in fact, when we first started, there was no internet anyway. So the ability to publish a digital story or share it, people would go home with it on a zip disk or on a VHS tape and just show it to whomever they wanted. Now, of course, it's much more of an issue because we get a lot of work, both from university departments, like I said, in study abroad, that maybe want to use the stories for marketing purposes, but also in research where the stories, researchers want to use the stories, and also in other organizations, where organizations with the homeless that maybe want to use the stories of some of the people that receive services to put them out there. And you have to think about what rights people have when entering into this work, how they can maintain ownership over their own stories and they're not co-opted by some other organization. Hopefully you're not the person that's co-opting their stories and you will protect them from being co-opted. So just some things to consider. If you have any feedback on that, you can always email me and we can consider adding things. Again, this kind of thing, along with cultural competency, is always a work in progress. You're never fully competent. You are never fully ethical. It's a continuum and an ongoing thing. So just some things to consider.
Awesome. And I'm going to share one other one that, Truman, I don't know if you want to, since you were the one that suggested this site, if you wanted to talk at all about what this is and how this could also help with some of the, and you're mute. There you go.
Sure. Excuse me. This is a website that I put together for the place where I teach, Columbia College, Chicago. Basically, it's just a giant resource for helping students and writing instructors to think through ethical and practical issues about using other people's work. If you were to click, I'm sorry, Stephanie, if you were to click on, yeah, right there. And if you were to scroll down once that loads, you can see there are basically hundreds of links that are broken up into sections about how to find Creative Commons materials for audio, for video, sort of primers on some of the law or guidelines associated with fair use and copyright and open sourcing and those kind of things. So this is it's a nice resource to go to if you're looking for links and stuff to share for your students.
That's great. Awesome. And just to everyone that's participating right now, when we send out the slides, I will make sure that all of these links that we've been going to are shared as well, so that you'll continue to have them again after the webinar, so you can go and root around and explore on your own time all of these resources that will help you. And Truman, if you want to just start rolling right along, we can go back and we can.
Okay, great.
There you are.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for being here, and thanks to CDS for inviting me. I didn't really realize I was going to be standing in for JM. I thought I was going to be sort of his backup guy. So there's some stuff I'm not totally prepared to talk about, but I can wing it or lie about it or whatever I feel like, I guess.
I think that goes under the issues around ethics.
Yeah, I just got to put that out there. Okay, good. So just before I get started, a little bit of my background, and I only mention this so that you can know what sort of questions that might be especially useful to ask me if we don't cover them explicitly in the presentation. So right now I'm a full-time lecturer at Columbia College, Chicago. I've got, I don't know if you'd say a lot, but a long experience with the Center for Digital Storytelling. And a lot of my scholarship focuses in the world of computers and writing, as well as writing and rhetoric or writing studies. My specialty is primarily helping other educators and scholars to get digital writing tools into the writing classroom. I've written lots of digital stories myself, and I've taught several classes that were informed by some of the principles of CDS, and I've actually taught a few classes where digital storytelling was the primary subject of the class. So that being said, last year, Daniel let me know that they were putting together, let's go back a slide or two, just to the front, the first one. One more back. Thank you. Daniel let me know that the University of Colorado Boulder wanted to work with CDS to see how CDS could inform their revision of their first year writing curriculum. That's their program in writing and rhetoric. That just happens to be what ours is called at Columbia as well. And so they worked a lot together before I got there, and Daniel might want to speak to that at some point. But when we went to work with them, what they were not only interested in what I could bring as a facilitator and trainer for CDS. That was the bulk of what my contribution was. But I also was able to explain to them a process where Columbia College Chicago had revised their first year writing curriculum with a lot of digital storytelling concepts that informed it. They might not be recognizable as direct or explicit, but they are certainly in there. So I'm just going to really go quickly through some of the slides that I showed in Colorado and then move on to some of the things that they were concerned about. And then at some point, we're going to watch a story of mine that might serve as a good example of how you can use digital storytelling in a writing classroom that's more focused on argument or scholarship. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. So a little bit of background on what we did at Columbia is writing. Our director had this idea that writing in the 21st century was changing, and we didn't really understand it wasn't obvious to us how to revise our curriculum to more effectively respond to that. And so we put together a committee. That's the next slide there. And I just wanted some Legos in my presentation. Sorry. We put together a committee of people, and what we ended up realizing is that in order to do this, we didn't feel like taking a page directly out of the book from digital storytelling would necessarily meet all of our institutional outcomes and objectives for our writing program. So we decided to take pieces of it that we thought would be most useful. And so rather than come up with specific assignments or specific modes of writing, we decided that we would break it break the new curriculum down into a series of 10 terms or concepts. And instructors who are teaching in the first year writing program could use these 10 concepts to fashion a course in any way they wanted to. They could fashion it around fairy tales or digital storytelling or outreach in service learning or those kind of things. Really, we're getting all sorts of ways that people are putting these to use. So I'm just going to very quickly run through what these 10 concepts are and then move on to a little bit more about CU Boulder. So the first concept, and these aren't really necessarily concept number 1 and number 2, but these I think I just put them in here in alphabetical order. So I think the first one is affordances, and that affordances is simply for those of you who want our explanation, it's just when you look at a medium like video or film or alphabetic text or audio, affordances just prompts students and instructors to ask the question, what is this particular medium good for? And what are its drawbacks? And it helps in thinking through the rhetorical decisions of what sort of resources you're going to use when you actually produce your texts. Okay, next slide. And then this one was pretty contested, but there were a few people that really wanted this. And the idea behind making alphabetic text one of our central ideas to the course is, before anything else, to keep people from taking it for granted. The idea that, well, if you've ever tried to talk with your students about how they make meaning with alphabetic text, how they read a sentence and come up with what it means, they have a very hard time explaining sort of the mechanics of that meaning making. Now, if you get them to watch a YouTube video and ask them about, what did you see in there, and you put those together and what's the message that you get, they're really quite good at it. But they can't do that with alphabetic text, not explicitly. It's such an opaque process for them. And the way we've structured some of these concepts, it allows us to take a new look at the way alphabetic text has traditionally worked. So next slide. And then we've got arrangement, and that's a pretty traditional concept, just about how you put things together, what comes first, what comes second. If you're going to have sound and image and voiceover, how these things fit together. And again, there are, for each of these concepts, and I welcome you guys to ask about this, but for each of these concepts, we try to have multiple contexts that they can work in, and print contexts being the one that we need to be able to apply all of these to. So that's arrangement. And the next one is circulation. And this one is a relatively new concept. Instead of going with the idea of the traditional canon of delivery, we wanted to talk about circulation. We wanted to talk circulation because texts basically don't go from one place to another and then stop. They go back and forth, and they go to multiple places at once. Sometimes you have control over it. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes texts circulate a lot more than other texts. And so it's one of the primary things that gets talked about in the media, as well as students, what's trending and that kind of stuff. So that's that concept. The next one is ethos. Again, another really traditional concept. And the way we look at this is basically just the way you present yourself online and how you go about constructing that presentation, and what are the affordances of presenting and building your ethos in one way or another. The next slide, please. Field. This is one of the more abstract concepts that we have looked at. And basically a field is akin to discipline or profession, those kind of words. But we wanted something that was a little bit more capacious. A lot of our students are involved in the arts and media production professions. And so field is basically just a way of talking about a set of people and texts and practices that have some cohesion in terms of a common goal of developing practices as well as knowledge creation. And field allows us some really interesting ways to talk about genre and to talk about delivery and circulation. And so it does provide like this umbrella, almost a frame, to pull together several of the other concepts. Okay, next slide. And then we talk about genre. That's a pretty standard thing. So I'm just going to move quickly past that one. And image, again, there's been lots and lots and lots written in rhetoric and composition scholarship about using image in the classroom. We thought it warranted its own place. Go ahead, next slide. And then another traditional rhetorical concept, kairos. The way we treat this is basically the timing of what you're saying at a given time, what's appropriate to say, when is the best time to say a particular thing at any given time, what resources are available to you, who is available to you, what's the atmosphere and attitude surrounding what it is that you want to say. All right, next slide. And then remix, again, this is something that might seem kind of obvious to students, but when it gets really fascinating is when we start talking about research and scholarship as remix, thinking about quotations, taking somebody else's text and putting it to work for yourself in terms of academic arguments and things like that. So this has been one of the pleasant surprises that our instructors who have adopted this teaching method have really, really come to like. And I think we've got one or two more. Oh, is that okay? So right now, oh yeah, I don't know if okay. So right now I want to show you some, also I'm not looking at the chat or the Q&A as I'm doing this. So if you guys want to jump in at some point and stop me, that's fine.
Yep, we'll do.
So what we're going to do now is watch a video that I produced quite a while ago for one of my academic classes. And I think it serves as a pretty good example of what you can do in terms of digital storytelling for academic purposes or making an argument. So go ahead and play.
When I was little and first started writing, the texts I produced were quite simple. But even back then, they had their own sets of production technologies. When I was a little older, I broke into the digital world. I adopted new technologies and left others behind. Eventually, my texts expanded beyond merely writing as I began to compose texts for digital media. In the last couple of years, I've even gone so far as to combine different modes of communication into single texts. Looking back across this progression is revealing. I've never thought of myself as resistant to new writing technologies, but there has often been a significant gap between the modes in which I compose and the modes through which I communicate. When I first adopted the computer as part of my writing process, I wasn't really composing on screen yet. I was simply taking my privileged mode of communication and translating it into another. Eventually, I stopped handwriting my first drafts and was able to type them up instead. Not only did it speed things up, it changed my writing process and the ideas I generated. I'd like to think that the technology improved my process, but that couldn't really happen until after I started to internalize it. Now, I've started to come into contact with technologies that are new to my composing process again. As a writer, I know how to use alphabetic rhetorical conventions, and they translate pretty well into other single-mode texts like audio and video clips. But even now, as I produce with sound or images, I compose primarily on a word processing screen first. The switch from composing on paper to composing on screen wasn't quick or easy when I was a little kid, and now I wonder how my writing process...
Okay, I don't think we need to watch the whole thing. We're going to provide a link to this. It's 6 minutes long, but at this point, I think you get the idea for some of the ways that you could end up talking about work like this. So could we go to the next slide, please? Thanks. So if you are if you are wondering about how to incorporate this stuff, digital storytelling or curriculum revisions at your own institution, I would love to talk to you more about that. I can get you all sorts of resources and whatnot. We couldn't find a textbook that accomplished what we want. We wanted something very specific, so we wrote our own. I'd be happy to share copies of that with anybody who wants to ask for one. Next slide. Another thing that often comes up when we're talking about working with these sorts of tools in the classroom is student access, especially access to hardware and software. Now we at Columbia we have licenses to a variety of different software, so that wasn't... Oh yes, Daniel?
I'm just saying right now, listen to Truman talking, and now you'll know why you need to listen to him talking about hardware and equipment, because he sounds a million times better than any of us.
Oh, sorry guys. I didn't mean to, well, whatever. Thank you. So what we ended up having to do was set aside some money or find some money to buy inexpensive and simple to use hardware. And again, this is a ATR 2100 USB microphone and a Zoom Q2 HD portable audio and video recorder. They're both really inexpensive and fantastic for students to produce work. They don't have any trouble adopting them and picking them up. So could we go to the next slide? One way to get buy-in from people like adjuncts as well as older, more established people in the department is that we provided professional development opportunities. We provide all sorts of online training as well as in-person sessions that sometimes are optional, sometimes are required if you want access to the equipment, for instance. And again, I can talk more about how we handled that. Next slide. And we didn't just implement this department-wide. We started off with 10 pilot sections and just to see how it would go. And we learned a lot. We learned that we didn't want 10 concepts. We wanted 14 concepts, and not all 14 were going to be required anymore. So we expanded and loosened it up a little bit. But it's good to keep in mind that you're going to learn a lot as you try to implement this, just like when you're writing a digital story, right? It changes during the production process. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip the hindsight. If anybody has specific questions there, they can ask. And now, those are the slides that I ran through when I visited CU Boulder. And these are some slides that JM, the guy that we worked with, who is in charge of CU Boulder's program in writing and rhetoric, and he provided me with some questions that he wanted me to put up on slides for the sake of discussion while we were doing the workshops. And this was the part of the workshop where the faculty were meeting together with several people from CDS to ask, okay, so we know what CDS does. Now, how is it that what is it that we can take? How can that inform what it is that we want to do here as a PWR program in Boulder? So the first question they had for discussion was, what is PWR's engagement with contemporary digital practices and platforms? Sort of taking a look at where they currently are, what they could build on, where maybe some holes were, opportunities that after having worked with CDS, they hadn't recognized before. And it was a really interesting and lively conversation. And again, I can give more details on each of these as it seems relevant to folks. Next slide. Thank you. Then they wanted to have a discussion about how do they integrate their current curricular goals and initiatives with multimodal practices. And I think that's really important for any program to ask. You can't just decide that writing is about something, or that your current curriculum is no good anymore and you should start from scratch. It really does have to be a process of transition, building on what you've got, really evaluating what it is that you do, finding the strengths, and reevaluating that whole list as it is infused with these other newer ideas and pedagogical practices. Okay, next slide. And this slide just asked people to share some of the strategies that they had been using already in their classes for multimodal assignments, things that had been working for them in terms of helping their students with the practices of implementing storytelling and argument and research and community involvement in the classes as they already existed. And then, of course, you've got to ask this question. This is maybe, I think, the only non-negotiable question you should really consider as non-negotiable, and that you got to ask people what they need, what they want in order to make this kind of stuff happen. Because there will be a lot of people just by default who will be resistant to these kind of things, just not because there's anything wrong with it, but just because it's new. And a lot of people, especially adjuncts and part-timers and folks like that, who are already stretched to the limit, and you're asking them to retrain and rethink and rewrite their syllabi and come up with new assessment practices. You're asking a lot. So you really have to do a lot to figure out what's going to motivate them and make this worth it to them. That was another reason we really developed some interesting professional development opportunities. Daniel, go ahead.
I was just going to say that Brian and Lisa can also probably talk to this as they rolled this out across the community college and worked. I remember a lot with they actually paid people to attend trainings.
Yeah, we do that too.
They can expand on that as well as part of their grant.
Okay, next slide. Okay, and now at this point, I was just ready to take questions, but I think we're probably going to take those as a group.
Yeah.
If you just want to quickly just show what the next couple slides are, these are the image credits. And again, I just wanted to note that I try to practice what I preach with the copyright stuff, and you can use this as an example of somebody else who's trying to do that. So, okay, thank you guys. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Truman.
Thanks,
Awesome. And I don't know, Brian and Lisa, real quick, if you wanted to speak to that, the faculty piece, before we get on to some of the questions that we've called from the Q&A and that folks have emailed me.
Sure.
Add?
Lisa's stepped out really quick, but she'll hop on, piggyback on whatever I say. But the July 2012 training, we had the August 2012 training, and then one thing we didn't mention in the beginning was the classes that we selected to pilot digital storytelling in. So we really focused on our paired courses, which Lisa mentioned, but those are more of our learning community classes where we have a developmental English section paired with the college content section. And those classes are back to back with co-teachers in there. And that gave us the space to work out this worry with technology. And from there, we continued to hold more workshops, 2 more large ones as we went through that first pilot year. And then the following year, we had some some of that Haku money to train some of the staff and some of their programs. I mentioned the Transfer Success Center. They went through the training to have their students produce some of their digital stories as well. And then embedded within that professional development piece, we had the faculty that were trained. And by the end of that first year, I think we had 30 trained. They were going into other people's classes to help out, larger classes to help out with story circles and to help out with technology and those kinds of items.
Great, thanks, Brian. This really leads into a question that a couple of folks have had, which is, how do you resource this type of thing on a tight budget? I mean, some campuses are more resourced than others, but whether you're talking about professional development and training incentives for faculty and staff, or partnerships with the Center for Digital Storytelling or hardware, et cetera, what have you all found as far as effective ways to resource this? And that can go to anyone. I don't know if Truman, do you want to start, and then we can go Marty?
I have to apologize, Stephanie. I was trying to get to some of the questions in the group chat. Could you just briefly say that question again?
Sure. We're just talking about what are some effective ways to resource these types of initiatives and programs, whether you're talking about professional development for faculty and staff, or trainings, or the cost around hardware. What has been effective for you?
Well, again, I think the most important thing to remember is that it's going to be really different from institution to institution, depending on the political climate, the budget climate, the types of students that you work with, the access that those existing students have to their own laptops, or whether or not they're going to need those things provided by the institution. So those things are all important questions to ask, but to put it most simply, I would say start small, develop one assignment that you want to put together that doesn't require much purchase or outlay of equipment, especially if you can use mobile devices or online resources like WeVideo, Audacity, things like that, and just really work hard to help your students produce a few good texts, as many as possible, but you only need 3 or 4 really moving or polished or impressive texts, and then you can start to take that to other instructors, get them on board. Once there's a conversation started, it's easier to get access to decision makers, and really you just got to start small and hope that it snowballs. But I don't think there's any easy way to do it.
Other folks want to chime in on that before we move on? Daniel?
No.
Briefly, one suggestion is, if you think of the digital storytelling process, the core activity is the story circle, and that's a group of people working together. So take that up a bit and begin to collaborate across different departments in the community. Consider what's called a pooled resource model, where you get matching grants. You get one group to say, I'll give you $100, and the other group to give you 1,000 or whatever. You can start small, which you should be starting small. But also there's, I think, a lot of internal grants that you can look to at your institution. Of course, depending on what institution you're at, and I know I'm at a different kind of institution that maybe has a little more money for faculty members. The reality is, people who are committed to this, like anything in your life, you're going to do it. So if you have a good product and you always put these 3 things together in your proposal, it's easier to get funding. The 3 things are curricula development, a publication, whether traditional text or visual, and then to increase university community collaborations. Those are what administrators like, and so that should be in your first sentence to advance the digital storytelling funding at your. And I'm happy to work with you to be on the unpaid advisory committee of your project. Get people from around the country that could be unpaid, but I get a wealth of experience working with you on your advisory committee to oversee it in a way that could help you get funds for it.
Awesome, Marty. Thank you. Daniel, did you have something to add?
Yes, certainly. I mean, and again, I don't know as much about the way things work within academia, but certainly I know that a lot of the funding sometimes will come from ed tech departments. So the folks in educational technology who, are there. There's always more funds for technology than there is for the other types of facilitation that we need to do with people to train them up to be able to do this work. It's crazy. They'll pay for computers, they'll pay for technology training, but oftentimes they won't pay for the real training that some of you, I found that a lot of people need when they're going to go and facilitate this, which is, how do you really deal with people's personal stories in a classroom or not in a classroom? How do you facilitate groups through this work? And there was some questions in here around, how do you facilitate a story circle? And Marty was just talking about that. I'll explain what that is in a second. Truman looks like he has something to say.
I just wanted to add two other things to keep in mind, or two other strategies. The first is the concept of aspirational institutions, and that is to find some other institution that your institution looks to as a leadership institution or as something to emulate, and show that they are putting these resources to use. That's actually was our primary strategy in getting about, I think we got about $5,000 worth of equipment from our request for that. And that worked really well. The other thing is, if you're a full-time person, if you can find the time in your schedule, get on a technology committee, become part of a committee that works with resources or organizes those resources. Those are both two really good ways, not only to start to have some influence, but also to really understand what it takes to get a request taken seriously.
Great, thanks, Truman. Brian, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you, Daniel, Marty, and Truman, talking about institutional, paradigms of how these things would work. We first leveraged a huge pile of grant money that we had internally through our Teacher Learner Center, and then that got the ball rolling, and then our VPI contributed money from her funds. And then after that, which Stephanie talked about, we used the Haku grant to continue the momentum with digital storytelling. And then now we're in this next phase where we're under, as I said, the strategic planning and trying to leverage that momentum to say, if we really want to get this buy-in from the college, here's some pieces that we need in place, such as making this a learning outcome and so on and so forth. Otherwise, it's too loose and too many silos making this work.
Great, thanks, Brian. This is a slight departure from that question around resourcing and really looking at where these types of programs and initiatives come from or start from on campuses. Some folks have had questions around, can this work in STEM disciplines? Have you seen it work in STEM disciplines? And there's a lot of focus on the student success programs for writing and rhetoric, anthropology. Can you talk a little bit about the diversity of how this can look on a campus program-wise? Lisa?
Yes, so CCD collaborated with CDS in November of last year, focusing on STEM development with the relationship with digital storytelling. And it is a different viewpoint, it's a different angle, but the idea is still that you're getting content across. And so while it looks different in STEM because of the content, it is still largely content focused. So it's not as impossible as people think. We even had a math video, which I can send you the link to, for an example of, well, how do I use math as a digital story? That question came up a lot, but we have an example.
That's great. It seems to be the same. We have the same questions that come up frequently with different teaching pedagogies like service learning, and well, that may work in social sciences or in humanities, but it won't work in STEM disciplines. So I think that'd be helpful to see that link. In looking at Daniel, did you have something else you wanted to jump in with?
I didn't know if you were moving on to something else. Theo had asked a question about what is the process of story circles, so I thought I would try and answer that.
Go for it.
Theo, hopefully you're still there. I don't know. But Holly actually answered it. It's asking if the question is if we're using the roadside theater model of story circles. I hadn't heard of that before, so I was just checking it out online, and it looks like it's very similar. I don't know if they took a look at some of our work or whether it's a common thing, but yeah, our story circles are such that part of it is definitely physical in the sense that it's actually a circle. We get people out of the idea that there's one person in charge and they're at the front of the classroom or something and everyone else is facing them. Everybody needs to see each other in a story circle. Everybody's at the same level. If I have a co-facilitator, which I normally do, I will never sit next to them. I don't want there to be expertise in any sense in any specific part of the room, whereas people are made to feel less expert, less of an expert on any other kind of room. And so everyone goes around and shares their story and how they want to share their, the beginnings of their digital story. Certainly, like, we usually ask people to prepare for these workshops, by taking a look at some examples, which we know definitely have a massive impact on what they're going to create, in terms of giving them a model of what it's supposed to be. So there are times when we actually consider not doing that and just telling people, well, it's a combination of words. They can either be text on screen or spoken by you, or spoken by Siri or whoever else you want to record. You can definitely open it up as much as you're comfortable, but we have people present the different aspects of their story or whatever they have available. It could be pictures, but most of the time it would be a written script. And sometimes they'll just go off book. What normally happens is that 90% of the people, at least, end up doing something different than what they came with. And sometimes it's just a little bit different in terms of, I'm going to tell the exact same story, but I'm going to write it as a letter to my father instead of a story about my father. That's a really big change in some ways and not so big of a change in other ways. But other people will completely change topics, and stories as they go in. And usually that happens after watching a couple pieces or checking out what's going on in the story circle. As they say, stories beget stories. So you'll notice that you might notice it as one person presents a story, a light bulb will go off in someone else's head. They'll tell you that it will. And they'll say, yeah, I was going to tell this story, but then I heard what Truman was saying over there. And I figured I better do something a little more important. And so that's actually, one of the interesting things. And we talked a little bit about it before in terms of sharing story work within a classroom, is that certainly there are people that kind of raise the bar for other people to enter into, a space of depth, I would say, or vulnerability. Not that that's necessarily your goal, but it certainly can be one of the benefits and also one of the risks of doing the work. Or, do you have a classroom that can support that kind of safety, I suppose? So we talk about that a lot. But in any case, everyone goes around, they present their work. I came through with Truman, actually, the creative writing department, graduate work at University of Colorado. And so we certainly had a certain idea of what a workshop was and how creative works got workshopped and critiqued. I go a little bit against that, or in a different way. And it's not to the point where everyone has to come in and say a positive comment. But I really want people to be aware of the types of things they're saying to people about their personal stories. So we almost structure it in a different way. Instead of having people jump in with comments of, you should do this and you should do that, I usually ask that the onus of the process is on the storyteller themselves. So they get to ask questions. When you're presenting your own creative work, you ask questions of the group. So we only get to answer the questions that you ask us, as opposed to, here's what I want to tell you. This is what you should do. And so that definitely, it certainly changes the vibe. It's not that other stuff doesn't go on. It still does. But I just bring awareness to the sense that that these are people's personal stories, and that it's much easier to edit other people's stories than it is to do your own. So I try and get away from people getting ownership and influencing other people's stories in some inappropriate ways. So that's usually like it's the biggest it's one of the biggest pieces of our work that, that we find is really important to our work. I know that in classrooms, you don't necessarily have time to hear everybody's stories in that way where everyone gets 20 minutes or something to share a story. So I know that at least with Marty and with other groups that I've worked with, I know that Marty's students sometimes will break into smaller groups and have their own story circles of 4 people. I think Truman, maybe you do, I don't know all of your practices, but there are different ways of doing it for sure. I hope that answers some of your questions. Sometimes, again, people will share pictures or a sound that they recorded. So it's not just the written text, but oftentimes that's the first thing that people will create, even if it was prompted by a sound, by a video, by a picture, that they will have written, around 300 words of a story down. And that's maybe something that they can share with the group and get feedback on. There's also a possibility, one last thing, that a story circle is not made for any feedback whatsoever. And I have run them this way, where all it is a listening circle. So you tell your story and it's listened to. And in some ways, and a lot of people will say this, that they knew everything they needed to change about the story in the telling of it, or even in watching people's listening to it and their reactions, not their vocal reactions in terms of what someone had to say back, but they could feel their own weaknesses in the story as they spoke it out loud. Because oftentimes people don't speak it out loud, and it's certainly a different practice to speak something out loud than it is to write it, or even just to read it silently to oneself. So I hope that answers some of the questions around story circles.
Great. Thanks a lot, Daniel. We're actually going to have time for, I think, just this one last question, and it's kind of a twofer. And we maybe we'll start with you, Marty, if that's okay. And this is really looking at or thinking about the use of digital storytelling as a way to connect with the local community, the off-campus community. And the question is really around both, how does that help to reinforce, or what are some of the challenges around developing some of those community partnerships for some of these digital storytelling programs? And then if there are examples of how institutions of higher education and students can use their digital stories as a form of outreach with local communities. So what's that campus community connection, and how does digital storytelling aid in that process?
Got it. And I appreciate the question, and I'm going to keep it short in case there's others that want to chime in. So if I read the question from Ashraf, which I think Stephanie you converted for me. Mm-hmm. So a lot of this stuff involves building trust. So I've been here since 2008, and I've been engaged at the community level because I'm just genuinely interested in it. And I feel as an academic, my role is to try to use my position to collaborate with people and create some new knowledge and maybe even get resources to different groups. So I think having that trust, which takes years to develop, is the basic foundation for any collaboration. I think the social justice stuff, all my work, I look at anthropology as a discipline to promote social justice. So all of my work is political, and that means to address health inequalities or to address corporate malfeasance, for example. So we can control, when we do digital storytelling, we can, in a way, control the message, but you can't control people's interpretations of the stories. And that's sort of the fascinating thing about all this. So I have tons of examples about social justice, digital storytelling, and community involvement, and I'm happy to share more if people contact me. You can go to my website, which I can share also later. But I think the key thing is getting the good examples that are done that have some kind of message or point that could maybe be somehow influencing some inequality or absence of power that needs to be addressed. So that answers part of it. I'll let others chime in if they have something to add, and then I can get to the other section if you want of that question.
Great. Other folks, reflections, thoughts about that question? Marty, you can just keep rolling along.
Okay, gosh, how could use, for outreach. Okay, this comes down to that sort of provocative statement about this stuff attracting money. These things just sell themselves. I mean, when you get people's stories, people come alive through these pieces, and others connect to that. Obviously, there's a range of quality in these stories, but I think with outreach, it's finding an issue and not forcing some message. one of the problems that's not being discussed when you talk about STEM or you talk about anthropology or rhetoric, like I don't force my students to pull in concepts into the story. I just want a human story that maybe is built on concepts but not necessarily integrated into the video, because it changes the story. It's like a essay hybrid digital story that sometimes is not so exciting, but they could be done in an exciting way. So if anything, the outreach component is creating a community event with food. Hopefully you do some screenings, talk to people, and then try to create momentum to get other people to tell the stories that they want to tell, as opposed to the ones that we want them to tell because we have them as a captive audience in the classroom.
Great, thanks so much. And just as a note, we're just a couple minutes away from our end time, and we want to be respectful of your time as well. So a couple of things. One is that if there is a last minute burning question you have, we may not have time to answer it with the full panel live, but we have the ability to answer you electronically via text. So if you have that, please go ahead and post that in the Q&A. Otherwise, the other opportunity is that the contact information and a comprehensive set of resources and references to the websites and the videos that we've been talking about and viewing this afternoon will be emailed to you. So it sounds to me, I will take the liberty of saying this, all of the folks that have facilitated this webinar would love to hear from you, and if there's a way that they can be of support in your own implementation of digital storytelling practices or programs at your institution, think of this group of people as a really solid set of resources for you. We will be, as I mentioned before, emailing out the slides along with a link so that you can view this webinar that's being recorded at any time, and in addition to the evaluation link, which we really encourage for you to fill out and take a moment to give us your feedback, because it does help us in continuous improvement and in collecting information about what's of value and maybe what's not so valuable. Any last minute thoughts or reflections from facilitators before we wrap up and move on our merry way to what Daniel described as the happy hour that we're all hoping to be at right now?
Go
Brian,
ahead.
Brian, go ahead, and then Daniel can sum up.
I think it's well worth the struggle to go through this journey if you keep focusing on the students, and of course faculty are going to be hesitant to, or I mean some faculty will be hesitant, some faculty will jump right in, of course, but it's, yeah, keep the focus to the students, and you'll make a good argument for making it happen.
Thanks, Brian. Daniel, you have the final word. Make it super meaningful and deep.
Well, I also wanted to answer a question, which Holly was like, "Oh, thanks for all this information, and can you guys move east?" So I just want to put out there that the Center for Digital Storytelling is an international organization. So these are just some of the local partners that we've worked with, but we go out and do custom trainings across the United States and internationally. So if that's something you're interested in, contact me. And to that point, Stephanie was going to put up a slide here now, which is that the next International Digital Storytelling Conference is out east. I'm assuming that you're talking about Eastern United States. So it is for the first time in the United States. It's always been in other countries before.
I'm looking for it.
It's DS.
Yep, there you go.
15. So if you look up on her screen right now, the website is, I can't see it over there.
It's dst2015.org.
So you'll see that that's the upcoming conference. It's September 25th through 27th, hosted by the 5 College Consortium. I guess it will be at Smith College. Or, no, actually, I think, is it at Smith? It's at one of those.
Yeah.
So a lot of the folks here will probably be there. I know Marty will have to be there. I don't think there's any question. Aline Gubrium, who he was referring to earlier, she'll be there as well, of course, because she's at UMass Amherst. So let us know if you're interested in public trainings or if you have any questions about having us come out to you.
Great. And then we'll just leave you with this. Also, if you're not in Colorado or Wyoming, the beautiful Mountain West, we're sorry. However, wherever you are, there most likely is a Campus Compact office that is there to work with you. And they may not be doing a lot of work specifically with digital storytelling, but they are resources for you and outreach and can get all this information as well. This is the National Campus Compact website, which is just compact.org, but you can look up state affiliates. So wherever you are in the country, look, there I am, gorgeous. Look, there's a link. So you can find who you need to contact based on where you are. Please do not hesitate. You probably are already Campus Compact members if you're on this webinar. But get in touch with these folks. They are there to help you out and work with you, and we'd love to partner with you. Many, many thanks to all of the folks, Truman, Brian, Lisa, Daniel, Marty. Thank you so much for your time, for your quite able representation of your institutions and your programs. And if you're on this call, get in touch with these folks. They're awesome. They can share their awesomeness with you. Happy
Stephanie,
Friday.
Thank you for putting this out there.
Yep, my
Thanks for all your
pleasure.
work.
My pleasure. All right, happy Friday to all. Thanks so much.
Bye, guys.
Take care.
See you.